So what's on your mind? What should we explore?
I have just a logistical question regarding the Mahamudra practice.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is there
Yeah. Don't bother repeating that, but just as the microphone comes, question about the logistics of the Mahamudra program.
Is there a week or a month that's best to begin if you have not attended before? Do you wait until January to start, or is that best? How do you engage?
The best way to engage, it's really too bad because there's a Mahamudra seminar going on down in Argentina right now with Lama Eric. So if you'd asked me a week ago, I would have said, just buy a ticket and flit on down to Argentina. So that's the kind of the easiest way to flow into that is by attending the Mahamudra seminar, whether it's in India or here, and in the future, now that the 3-year retreat is done, we will do that again. But the seminar is really just a launch. It provides kind of the package of practices. So given that, one could begin any time, you could say. It really depends on how much you want to take on and how you're comfortable taking things on, because we have within the Mahamudra program we have kind of a daily schedule of calm abiding practice. So that's fairly easy to get. Oh, let's see what those are. What are the instructions for those? And you're in. There's the Chenrezig practice, which is something that one can do, like say every week or as it fit in. And at the beginning, it's actually not necessary to go in and do the particular preliminary practices, the set of what's called ngondro. It's not necessary, but if one's inspired to do that, it's easiest to sync up with wherever we happen to be, and that would be a matter of waiting for probably next January, or whenever we kind of spin things or start up the Mahamudra seminar again. But right now we're basically kind of halfway through the annual cycle with that. But if you're already familiar a little bit with those, then anytime you show up, then it's kind of, then it's a reminder and you can see how it goes. The program itself was designed by Bokun Rinpoche to provide kind of a long-term path of practices that were challenging enough to actually, if one really dove into it, it could have some transformative impact. That could actually happen, but it was also sufficiently, and it's challenging enough that you do have to part the waters within your daily life to find something like an hour and a half if you're trying to do all the parts of it. But it's also something it's possible to do, and over the long term. He knew that many people didn't have time or kind of possibility within their life to do an extended retreat, but he wanted something that people, if they really sustained effort, they could have some of the advantages of a kind of a long-term practice program. So that's the general intention. So I've given you several non-answers. Yes, you can also just come talk to me too and get more detail. It's more efficient to offer the instructions for the ngondro practices kind of to a group, and you could actually look at the archived videos of those instructions, and then you could, in the privacy of your home, decide whether or not it was your cup of tea or not. But I can also offer instruction on those things too.
Thank you.
Robin.
Hi, thanks for leading the meditation. I've been noticing lately when I do meditate, my mind just definitely just goes wild. But what I've been working on specifically when it comes to it, because I get a lot of images, songs, thoughts, commercials, whatever, just rolling through my head, and I'm sure that kind of happens to anybody. One thing that I tend to do is, instead of necessarily focusing on my breath, while that can be somewhat of an anchor, I tend to just sort of watch my mind stream and not hold on to any specific things. Is that like a positive practice within shamatha, or is there something that I could be doing a bit different?
That can be a positive thing. I have to say, I was hooked when you said commercials were playing, and I was wondering whether or not you were getting some kind of getting paid by the click on those for playing those commercials to yourself. But probably not.
Luckily, commercialization has not gotten to that point
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah. When the mind is really busy, it's good to do very brief sessions with some vividness. The challenge in doing the practice of putting one's mind on the breath for an extended period of time is, I don't know if this is 100% universal phenomena, but sometimes the more kind of energetic the mind is, and the more energy one puts onto the breath, it's kind of like a rebound effect. So that there's only a certain amount of time where you can actually bring enough energy with a kind of a relaxed element to it, so it's very focused, without it kind of triggering kind of this being completely lost. So it's good to do a lot of short sessions. And I remember at the very beginning feeling kind of very hopeless about this. And I had a little digital clock, and the little red numbers would shift, and I would just say, let's see whether I can kind of stick it out between one number and the next number, 1 minute. And let me see where I am when I see, and I would just sit and look at the clock. So very short sessions, so that you can actually have some sense of, as Michael has said, some sense of success right in that, without having the overwhelming sensation being, man, I can't do this. So that's a piece of it.
I don't really necessarily feel like I can't do it.
Yeah.
It's quite like, it's really that I sort of let my mind go and not really like get caught up in it. Like, just don't really go down the path of a thought. Just sort of let it pass like clouds.
Yeah, so I'm getting to that part of it. So, but I'm just pointing out that with that, the practice of placing one's attention on the breath, that it's good to do it in a way where you have some success with it. And that means doing it kind of briefly and vividly. And within that, you can kind of relax a little bit without getting thrown out. The practice of placing one's attention on the flow of mental phenomena, that's good to do. That's also best done in even briefer sessions, because it's very easy to sort of be aware of it and sort of, to be aware of it and to be sort of not following, sort of letting it go. So it becomes kind of a delicate thing. If we really have our attention on thoughts in a kind of very vivid way, they can just evaporate. And then just resting in that space. But a lot of times what happens is we're sort of really clear. And we're sort of carried along by this kind of undercurrent. And it's good to become familiar with what's going on. But again, it's better to do that with more vividness, so that kind of the undercurrent doesn't become stronger. It's actually easy for the undercurrent of thought to become stronger in that situation. So I would say to actually alternate between using the breath, and then if you want to place your attention on the unfolding of the experience of thought, the flow of that, to do it in very briefly, so that the kind of a subtle momentum doesn't get started. One of the tests that I found helpful at the beginning doing that was, if thoughts started to make sense, I was adding some juice. And I was getting sucked in a kind of a subtle way. Thoughts themselves are not the enemy, but our tendency to get sucked in is incredibly strong.
That makes a lot of sense.
The answer, part of the answer for me in my practice, learned from my teachers, is also we have to simplify our lives more. And it's quite hard to do. And when we sit down, and we've been very busy watching the internet, listening to music, the news, chatting with friends, drinking a lot of coffee, running around with a big list of to-dos, of course the mind's going to be busy because we've been busy. So it's about supporting the practice on and off the cushion. So the more I simplify things, I try to do about 10 minutes of news a day online, so that I can control it, shut it down when I don't want to be, hearing all the details, or go into an article if I want to. And that's enough. I keep up quite well. And so the more we run around to movies, music, stimulating, and then think we're going to sit down and be calm, is just not realistic. It's just not realistic. We're really not supporting our practice. And this culture is just so stimulating right now. It is so stimulating. So that's a really good thing to think about, is what am I doing that will help my sessions? What am I doing off the cushion that will help? Does that make sense? Because we've all got those commercials going, but we can turn them down.
I don't want to necessarily hold this place hostage, but I have one more question, and that is, there's when Rinpoche was here, he said something around the idea that we can recognize that it's all one mind and that our thoughts are not separate from ourselves. But at the same juncture, I know that it's me, considering, or, that I am those thoughts as well as, but I am also observing them. So I'm wondering how this all can end up tying in, if that's even an easy question to answer.
I would have to go back and see what it was that you're kind of semi-quoting, because I don't recognize exactly, in what you said, I don't recognize exactly what I recall Rinpoche saying at any point. So that then I'm wondering kind of what exactly is your question in relationship to your practice?
That I guess that I don't remember. It's just been kind of a hazy recollection of the idea that that we separate it when we're on the cushion, that we separate ourselves from our thoughts. And in this, something that I've been doing is the practice that I was talking about, in that I feel like I'm separating myself from my thoughts while simultaneously those thoughts are me, but I know that they're me in a realistic way, considering they're in my brain. So I don't know, whatever.
Mm-hmm. This, I think, is this reflects something that I think is quite common, getting sort of launching into practice, and I think it's best actually addressed by just keeping it very simple, and not trying to avoid the tendency to want to categorize things like this is me and whatnot, because kind of the long-term picture in practice is that whatever we think is me, we have to shine the light of awareness at that, so we can examine the sense of me-ness that has thoughts. So from the beginning, from the point of view at the beginning, the sense that it's just fine to say, "Oh, I'm aware of my thoughts." It's got, but don't make a big deal out of the meanness of that's feeling aware of those thoughts. It's we're at the beginning. We're just cultivating a continuity of attention. So better to not make kind of a philosophical big deal out of this terminology. Over the long run, we can, once there is stability of attention, we go, and exactly who's looking? But that takes a fairly high degree of stability to do that without getting caught up in all kinds of conceptual answers, explaining to ourselves. And one of the most common explanations is, well, there's the me that's looking at the me that's looking at the thoughts, and it's like, kind of time out, just stop. We have to go towards simplicity in this.
Okay, thanks.
I do remember there were actually a couple of questions that touched on this kind from a philosophical point of view. And I think you actually formulated one of them, kind of who's the you that is holding on to the sense of I. It's like how was it? It was like for countless eons you have been grasping onto this sense of I. And so like it really sounds, when you hear it, if you try to parse it out in a very precise philosophical way, it just doesn't make any sense. So this is one of those cases where you have going at it from kind of a very simple perspective is really helpful. Keeping it simple.
That comment made me think of when we were in the Bardo training teaching, there was the reference to, I think somebody asked the question, well, since karma carries forward, what carries the karma forward? What's it, this, like, what's the record? How does it accumulate and then is it regrouped in the new, as you come into your new being kind of thing? I don't know if that's a subject for this group, but
what's your question in that?
It's the same question. What is it that carries the karma forward? What is it? What's the vehicle of transfer of karma?
Somehow
from lifetime to lifetime.
Yeah. Somehow it's philosophically attractive to jump into this notion of the question of what goes from this life to the next life. Assuming that we know something about either side of that gap, and then there's this big mystery about this thing of what's going on in this gap, and it avoids kind of in a knee-slappingly humorous way. It avoids the question of, have I actually seen what goes on from one moment to the next in this life? And that one is my thought about these kinds of philosophical questions is like, look at that one first. And I think if we look at that one first, this other question becomes a much more down-to-earth, simple kind of question that doesn't require a lot of, in order to give us some kind of confidence, which is really the kind of the why would one try to answer this? It's not about coming up with some kind of artful philosophical statement of things. We have the cleverest explanation from what goes from this life to the next life. So there, aren't you all happy? Didn't that relieve you of the fear of death? Yeah, it's like, no. Our explanation is far more artful and sophisticated than yours. As I was like, no. And I don't even want an answer, but I just want to know, has anybody who's posing that question and trying to come up with that, have they actually looked at what goes from one moment, how one moment goes from one to the next in this life? That's certainly, yeah.
I have a less philosophical one, since nobody else is coming up with anything.
Yeah.
So when hiking, I do a lot of hiking, and I'm always trying to balance between whether I should just be running a constant stream of a mantra or whether I should be just paying attention with no mantra. to the rocks, trees, mountains, water, whatever, without falling down, tripping. Is there a preferred method for walking meditation, I guess? Or when would you use mantra versus not mantra, I guess is maybe the question. And which mantra do you prefer? No.
You ask the question as though there is some kind of universal principle or answer to it.
Maybe the answer is no.
And I don't think there is such a thing. I think it really, it's always good to look to see what actually produces some kind of transformation.
Based on experience?
Yeah.
Personal.
Yeah, personal experience. So all of the things that you've mentioned require some time, you could say, in the laboratory, on the cushion, in the laboratory, to see exactly how does this practice work of bringing my attention to, and you said paying attention to the rocks, trees, streams. You say, there's a lot of ways you could phrase that. That wouldn't sound like you're looking at things. There are different things you could do there. But it's based on what you do on the cushion. How do you extend from the practice and the method that you're familiar with on the cushion to take that out? So again, if you say, well, reciting mantra, how is it? What are you taking out? Reciting mantra could be just making sure that you've kept your attention, providing a place to bring your attention. It could be a practice of keeping in mind the sense of bodhicitta, never leaving the space of cultivating bodhicitta, the loving kindness and compassion relative to bodhicitta. It could, so any of those things, if you just say one of them, I could actually say, well, which way are you approaching that? And it's good to know how it is that you're approaching it, but it's really more a matter of you have to look into your practice and see what is actually providing what's providing kind of the juice for transformation in your practice, and then try to take that one out and see what the method actually looks like in that case.
I'll just add a couple of things because I like to hike and practice. So it's not going to be one thing, as Bill said. And this idea of the medicine chest or the tool belt that we have in Buddhism, one day one thing will work, the next day it'll feel very dry and ritual, like mantra can be like really transformative in the woods, with the mind of perhaps open to all the creatures you can't see, but they're there, or all the beings who can't come into the woods because they're in prison or they're in a, some kind of imprisoned state. Offering it to them, that can be very juicy. And then the next day it doesn't work at all, and it's just nice to just feel the experience and a sense of the self being the woods or whatever. So shift. But I definitely like to be silent in there a lot. Yeah. That's the starting point. Yeah.
That way.
Is the green light on?
So kind of in that vein of practice, for the past 2 years I've been lucky enough to
move really slow and at my own pace on a pretty daily time frame. And I've been doing a lot of practices where I just kind of show up to what's around me, and a lot of, I think, foundations of mindfulness practices. And those have been amazing. But recently my life's like completely shifted, and I feel kind of like a zombie because I'm so busy that I can't really see straight.
You can't
really see straight.
Mm.
And so the practices that I've been relying on and have been enjoying and have brought a lot of transformation and fruit into my life in the past 2 years, I'm unable to do. And it's been really frustrating. And it's made me feel a little lost in how to go about my daily life and find sort of that like bigger meaning to it. So maybe, I guess my question is, how do you find a new practice to shift into when things are so busy? Because I really just don't even feel like I'm fully showing up to anything in my day. And it's been a struggle.
Mm-hmm. There are two pieces, I think, and one is to make sure, since you did create a habit of spreading some practice through your day, there's still probably some momentum of that to capture, but you'll probably have to concentrate and you have to look for something different, some different feeling tone than, it's not the way it felt before. The way it felt before, I could kind of rely on this feedback loop of, I feel like I'm kind of on track.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what's happening. I mean, I feel kind of in a fog of exhaustion at all times.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to feel present, whatever that means.
So injecting in that speed, you have to inject with some energy, kind of a lot of very brief moments of clarity. But in those, you have to let go of the yardstick that was somewhat helpful before. It was helpful, but it was also pernicious too. There was kind of this is the good news, bad news thing about kind of finding some groove in our practice, that it can actually help us sustain deeper transformation, but it can also become like a self-containing thing. This is what practice is.
Yeah, and I found myself wanting to protect that.
Yeah.
And now I'm not able to.
Yes,
and I try to protect it still.
Yeah.
Like, how do I get back to that?
Yeah, so you can't go back. You can't go
Right.
home anymore.
But I want to go home.
I want to go home. Let go. So part of it is actually sort of letting go of that, but finding the way to carry some kind of inspiration forward to explore new possibilities. It's kind of like you went from the rehearsal to the performance. And now what you had time to kind of practice your lines and go through the blocking of the moves and on the stage, and it's kind of very clear. And now you're performing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different relationship with what's coming up. But those brief moments are really critical, so that you can actually, at least in your mind, you can say, I'm injecting moments throughout my day. And in those, you can discover other kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one piece of it. It's just the brevity and clarity and repeated engagement. In terms of a shift in the kind of practice, it you may actually find that there's some shift in the formal practice that you do that might fit, but not necessarily. But something that you could look at, and you could try to place your mind on kind of what was the character of the transformation that was actually in progress. What were the dynamics of that? And based on that, it might be possible, whoever you work with, to kind of find what container could actually carry that in a formal way, whether it's in the direction of and what might be the next step, what might be supportive. Is it something that could move into a different kind of calm abiding meditation, a different kind of stability, a different kind of insight practice, a different aspect of the four immeasurables? You might find something, you might be able to identify, based on this arc, something else could rise to kind of carry that, and it wouldn't necessarily be the same vehicle that you were relying on before. But a big piece of this is just like, this is a different stage, this is a different environment, so the practice is not going to look the same, and it's not going to feel the same. And then trying to find some ground within that.
I come on this often, partly because I keep shifting my living experience, and at the monastery, then in the retreat, then out of the retreat, then into the city, and first of all, I really want to reaffirm, Bill, that it's a great opportunity when that cracks, when your form that you've relied on cracks, because we've made it too solid, just like anything else. And so it's a great opportunity, not a bad problem. So if you can bring that attitude toward it a bit. And then I use a couple carrying practices when I'm in those bardos like that. We're always in bardo, but where it's really clear I'm in a bardo, And one is do Tonglen, even 1 minute, just off the cushion thought, I'm so frustrated, I'm so foggy. May this suffice for all beings, and may we all be free of this. Those moments really stack up. They're incredibly powerful, and they're just that long, just as long as I said it. And the other one, I find those bardo times really conducive toward the dreamlike thing. Like, wow, I had that dream, and I had everything lined up, sort of, and it felt good, and bam, I'm in this other dream. And holding it like a dream softens it. So it's not like, I got to get back to that, or I'm doing something wrong, or this foggy time is wrong. It just ends the wrongness, Mm-hmm. So just holding it, this is, new dream here, new surroundings, and working that way. And then I think this is some of what Bill is also saying, but I always hear Lama Michael, the one breath throughout the day, just, in those most moments of crush in the car, or rushing to work, or someone's too many demands, big list, just that one breath, shamatha, just right now, right this minute. Okay, Got it. And the only other thing, each day I frame, no matter what's happening, as soon as I come to consciousness, I'm not even out of bed, do your refuge prayer. And you don't have to wait till you set up the altar, or just, I take refuge right now, as soon as you come out, because you want to be having that mind as we really go through larger bardos. We want to have that mind down. And at night, I dedicate everything of the day to the end of suffering of beings. How long did those just take? Less than a second. Very powerful, though, to get the habit. Yeah. And then it gets easier. It'll shift. It'll be something new, beautiful. Yeah.
Something that I found occasionally helpful in times when I felt completely at a loss, like whatever I was going through, this is totally unacceptable. This is completely bad. I'm completely head over heels. To it, just reminding myself in the midst of those, and this is kind of apropos of Khenpo Rinpoche's teachings on ordinary mind, just say, at some point, even this experience, this exact experience, which I am treating as like completely hopeless and out of control, even this experience could be self-liberated. And that actually, that's given me, over and over, it's given me some kind of ground for, like, this is not what I'm thinking it is. I have not encapsulated the whole of the potential of this by the narrative that I just told myself about how this totally sucks. It sucks, and I suck, and everything sucks.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Closing time, I don't know, but this was a question that John sparked about the continuum, and the question is around scientific confirmation of Buddhist tenets, which I think is there and becoming increasingly perceived by the scientific community, and so and the specific research I was thinking of is that was conducted by Ian Stevenson. In his book, 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation. Mm-hmm. If you're familiar with that, that seemed to me something very similar to how these tulkus are found, mm-hmm. by recognizing objects, that mm-hmm. he found 20 cases of small children who could be led into neighboring villages and identify people by name and identify the content of closets and cupboards and what was in them by memory. That seems to me it would be very powerful for Westerners who were torn between two realities, if they could avail themselves more of that kind of research. I mean, it's a different kind of a laboratory, but yeah. Is there room in this kind of a community for those kind of questions as well? I mean, it seems very supportive of what you're doing.
There's definitely the room for all kinds of questions in this community. Our capacity to offer answers or follow up on the exploration, that's a different matter. But the questions itself, it's like, more power to it. I think there's, I've not read that book, but I know a couple of people have told me about it, and
happy to lend it to you.
Yeah. And it really does sound like it is actually really well done in terms of the kind of the anything that you would ask somebody to pass muster in terms of process. It sounds like it really it's not flaky, and it presents a very interesting kind of situation, when we find something like that, I'm reminded of when all of a sudden people stopped thinking that ulcers were due to stress, and there's, oh no, it's H. pylori. And like overnight, people just, okay, well, let's get rid of that way of treating it, and we'll do this other thing. And the one way that didn't work, now something else actually seemed to work. There is a way in which information like this can be that kind of, oh, this is a really different situation than I thought it was. But it can also be just like, that's still just way too much. And in that, it's actually very instructive to see how much we can resist things, even though they're kind of, because we say, no, I'm demanding this evidence, and somebody says, okay, yeah, just here's the evidence you wanted. I kind of tried, yeah, but I know I can't handle that. So it's interesting. I think for some people, it would be very helpful to kind of open to other possibilities. And I think for some people, it would actually be very good to see the rigor with which that's approached, because I think for some, we can be very sloppy in our own thinking and our own relationship with stuff. So seeing that rigor is also very helpful. But regardless of how we explain these things, I still go back to kind of what passes from moment to moment. Then I feel like within that, because that's the driver's seat perspective. I'm not so concerned about how the Indy 500 looks from the grandstand. I'm interested in what it's like behind the wheel. That's the thing. And so going back to the piece, like, how does this work behind the wheel? To the extent that the explanations help us kind of relax, kind of a little, I'm not sure about this. No, actually, we tried that, and we've done the research according to the standards to which you would like to become accustomed. It's clear. You go, okay, I can relax that piece of concern. I think that's really helpful. But I go back to the driver's seat piece.
The experience.
The experience.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you all. Thank you. And on your, and also we should thank those this morning who took part in tidying up the center and leaving it in such nice shape for us to come and just sit down like everything happens by magic. And so as Bob offered the invitation to become part of the magic, that's a good thing to do. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time.